in the lawsuit that you're a part of, AAUP versus Rubio, you explained in a post on the Harvard Crimson, quote, "For now, the Trump administration has targeted pro-Palestinian campus activists, shored up by allegations of anti-Semitism and terrorism. This is a clever gambit because of how effectively the Israel-Palestine issue divides opinion on and off campus. But whatever anybody thinks about the content, freedom of expression is protected under the First Amendment. We have every reason to expect that the Trump administration's plans extend far beyond these individuals and far beyond the issue of Israel-Palestine." So, Maya, can you talk through your concerns and your fellow lawyers who are part of this lawsuit and how you expect it to play out?
Well, let me make clear that I'm a history professor, not a lawyer. Okay. And one of the things that I think is so important for us right now is to have all of us faculty, all of the people who are invested in the institution in the way that Professor Summers just outlined as a bastion of research and learning and investigation and inquiry across all sorts of fields, get together to articulate the purpose of the university and defend it. Because what we are seeing from the Trump administration is a wholesale attack using every single means at their disposal. It's a different one every week, practically every day, to try to knock down this bulwark of American democracy, of American liberal society. We filed this lawsuit some weeks ago at the time that deportations were beginning on what appeared to us to be ideological grounds. A few weeks later came the notorious demand letter addressed to Harvard that made clear that the agenda of this administration is to knock down free inquiry much more widely.
Mr. Summers, I have to ask you, you've been very clear publicly about your criticism of the student protest movement on Harvard's campus. Now seeing what this administration has done with criticism like that, creating this sort of wedge, this opening here, with which it looks like they aim to transform Harvard and all of higher education potentially, do you look back at what happened on Harvard's campus over the course of the last year differently?
I think that Maya and I are in complete agreement that what the Trump administration is doing is the stuff of dictatorship and is a complete and outrageous overreach. There are questions there, frankly, lesser questions in the grand scheme of things, about what the right disciplinary policy is, what the right approach to commenting is. Should it be okay for people to occupy buildings without being punished? Is that free speech or is that disruption? When people say that Israel shouldn't exist, is that just free speech that is part of what everything should be respected in a community? Or is that speech that should be called out and criticized? And there's room for debate about those questions. And in the spectrum of people at Harvard, I'm someone who's probably for more discipline, for more criticism of speech that it seems to me gets very close or over the edge of being anti-Semitic. But that's a debate that should be had in a university. And if there's a serious allegation of real civil rights violations in terms of anti-Semitism, that's something that the government should investigate, as the Biden administration did investigate a significant number of universities. And that's a conversation where I suspect there are differences in view between Professor Jasanoff and I. But that's really a much smaller thing than the idea that the federal government should engage in extortion with no hearing, no due process, no notice, nothing, just cut off of funds of billions of dollars with respect to ongoing research, ongoing support to poor students, or that it's okay that the federal government make a demand that it be involved in the review of who's going to be a professor at Harvard and who isn't. That's just not the way we do things in the United States, and that's the fundamental issue here. So yes, I have believed and do believe that there's a lot of reform that's absolutely necessary at Harvard. I think there have been serious mistakes made over many years. Those are views that can be debated, but none of it justifies what the Trump administration is doing. And I actually think it is useful in terms of resisting the tyranny for it to be clear that some people who have real concerns about ideological biases and the like, excesses of DEI and the like, some people who are uncomfortable with some of the things we have done, nonetheless find outrageous and completely inappropriate what the Trump administration is doing.
Professor Jasanoff, if I can pick up on that point for a moment and get your thoughts, because the idea that the Trump administration is leading us into an authoritarian or dictatorship because of exploiting this issue and the protests, I think is important to kind of drill down on. These protests happened a year and a half ago before Trump was in office. Do you think the way they were handled opened the door for the way the Trump administration is exploiting them now, and whether or not Harvard bears responsibility for not coming out at the time and rejecting what the Biden administration painted these protesters as? It wasn't just that they came out and said these protests are peaceful protests should allow. They actually tried to paint them all as sympathetic to Hamas or sympathetic to terrorism or anti-Israeli, when they were not in large part by that, and whether or not there is a double standard with how pro-Palestinian protests on your campus and others are treated. You just had an former Israeli Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, who joked about giving a pager to protesters on your campus. That is a violent act that resulted in the death of innocent Lebanese people when Israel detonated pager attacks in that country, and there was no consequence, and no one spoke out about the fact that he was allowed to come and given a red carpet treatment at Harvard University.
I very much appreciate your question. I do think that the Trump administration is exploiting an opportunity that was given to them. And if I may say, with all due respect, there were some vocal members of our community, including Professor Summers, who were very quick to identify these protests as anti-Semitic and to raise the issue of anti-Semitism on our campus. He and I agree completely about the authoritarian moves that are being made now. We both care very, very deeply about this institution and its health. I do think, however, that the way in which anti-Semitism was instantly wielded as a charge against these protesters, the way in which the language of inclusion and comfort and safety was immediately wielded to try to shut down their activities. At the very same time, it must be noted that they themselves were victimized by all kinds of doxing and other assaults on their freedom, led to some of the moves that we are seeing now. I would have preferred for us to be as vocal and clear about our defense of the First Amendment as we are being now. Back in October of 2023, I would have preferred for us to have clear policies, exactly as Professor Summers says, on where, for instance, occupying buildings or something like that are violations of our rules. We should have moved on that. But I would have preferred for this discussion to take place with content neutrality and leaning into a broad-based protection of speech and a broad-based understanding of the many kinds of constituencies and groups that we have on this campus, and the ways in which not only Jewish students, but of course Muslim students, Arab students, pro-Palestinian students were also being thrown into positions of great politicized persecution in the wake of the October 7th attacks.
You and I completely agree on what's most important, which is resisting the vast overreach of the federal government right now. You and I are going to have to disagree pretty fundamentally on aspects of the response to events last fall. I spoke out within hours of doxing, absolutely against the doxing. That was wrong and inappropriate and should have been fought. But you know what? When 35 student groups on our campus said that Israel deserved what happened, I think it was imperative that our leaders speak out much more strongly than they did against that idea, which was allowed to represent Harvard in media across the country. And when 3 university presidents, including ours, testified in ways that produced the most viral film clip in the history of the U.S. Congress, because people were kind of stunned by their unwillingness to condemn anti-Semitism and to condemn terrorism, I think we were making a pretty substantial mistake at that point in the way the university responded. And when deans of the university handed burritos in to protesters who were occupying buildings in solidarity, when that was done by university deans, I think that was a big mistake. And when a dean in our university, a dean, the leader of a major school, in a major convocation address, compared the Nakba and the Holocaust, compared Israel's founding to the Holocaust in completely parallel structure, I think something very wrong was happening at our university. Don't you?
Secretary Summers and Professor Jasanoff.
We need the First Amendment.
We would love to have the two of you back because this is an incredibly important and insightful